In February of 2023, in a quiet cardiology ward in Madison, I signed the consent forms with a blue pen they keep tied to the clipboard. Snow stacked against the window screen. My husband, Tom, was polite and distant, answering emails he said were from a supplier. We had been married 22 years. 2 grown stepchildren, no children together. The nurse wrapped the cuff, read the numbers, and taped the line into my arm. I remember the cool sting, the paper wristband, and Tom asking where I had put the house keys. A week earlier I had found a draft on our printer that did not have my name where it used to be. That is when I called my own attorney quietly. We did not argue. By the time I changed into the gown, everything that mattered was already in motion. What happened in those 90 seconds while I was under changed everything. And he never saw it coming. Let me tell you how I got there. Her name was Marion Holt, and she was 52 years old that winter. She had spent most of her adult life as a nurse, then a clinic administrator, managing schedules and budgets and staff rotations with the same steady hand she used to hold a syringe. She had worked at the same hospital for 18 years before moving into administration, and even now, 5 years after leaving clinical work, she still thought in terms of vital signs and protocols. Structure gave her comfort. The order made sense. She had been married to Thomas Larkin for 22 years, a man who owned a regional supply firm that distributed industrial equipment to manufacturers across the Midwest. Tom was 56, broad-shouldered, with graying hair he kept neat and short. He wore the same cologne every morning, something woody and expensive that lingered in the bathroom after he left. He drank his coffee black, read the Wall Street Journal on his tablet, and kept his office door closed when he was on calls. They lived in a modest 2-story house on the west side of Madison, Wisconsin, a neighborhood where people waved from their porches and cleared each other's driveways after snowstorms. The houses were older, built in the 1950s and 60s, with deep front yards and mature trees that dropped leaves every autumn in thick golden carpets. The marriage had been steady, if not warm. Functional, if not close. They had separate checking accounts and a joint savings account for the mortgage and utilities. His 2 adult children from his first marriage called on holidays, sent cards at Christmas, and visited once or twice a year with polite conversation and careful smiles. Marion had no children of her own. She had been married once before, in her late 20s, a brief union that ended amicably when both parties realized they wanted different lives. That divorce had been simple, no property to divide, no children to negotiate. Just signatures and a handshake and separate apartments. Marion's younger sister, Elise, visited every other Sunday. She was 45, a school counselor with kind eyes and a calm voice that could soothe even the most anxious teenager. Elise had never married, lived alone in a small bungalow across town, and kept her life simple and uncluttered. The 2 sisters were close in the way that siblings become close after their parents die, a bond formed not just by blood, but by shared loss and mutual understanding. Their mother had passed away 8 years earlier, their father 2 years before that. There were no other relatives nearby, no cousins or aunts who called regularly. It was just Marion and Elise, and that was enough. The rhythm of Marion and Tom's life together had become predictable, like the hum of the refrigerator at night or the way the front step creaked when someone came home. They ate dinner together most evenings, simple meals she prepared after work, roasted chicken, steamed vegetables, pasta with olive oil. They watched the news, read in separate rooms, and went to bed at different times. Tom often stayed up late in his office, the light visible under the door, the sound of his keyboard tapping softly. Marion woke early, made coffee, left for work before he came downstairs. On weekends, they ran errands, mowed the lawn, paid bills. They spoke about logistics and schedules, about who would pick up the dry cleaning and whether the furnace needed servicing. They did not speak about feelings or dreams or disappointments. That kind of conversation had stopped years ago, so gradually that neither of them remembered when. But in early January of 2023, that rhythm changed. It started with a receipt. On the evening of January 12th, a Thursday, Marion was sorting laundry in the basement. It was just after 7 in the evening, and the house was quiet. Tom was upstairs in his office. The washing machine was running, the gentle hum and slosh of water filling the space. Marian pulled clothes from the dryer, folded them into neat piles, separated darks from lights. She picked up Tom's gray wool coat from the basket of items waiting to be dry cleaned and checked the pockets, a habit she had developed years ago after accidentally washing a ballpoint pen that had exploded and ruined an entire load. Her fingers found a folded slip of paper in the right pocket. She pulled it out and unfolded it under the basement light. It was a restaurant receipt from a steakhouse on Monroe Street, a place called the Capitol Grill. She knew the name, had passed it dozens of times, but had never been inside. It was upscale, expensive, the kind of place where business executives took clients. The date was printed clearly at the top, January 9, 2023, 7:32 p.m. 2 entrees, 1 filet mignon, 1 ribeye. 1 bottle of wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon, $98. The total was $122. With tax and tip, the total came to $137.43. At the bottom, in blue pen, the server had written a short note, "Lovely couple," with a small smiley face drawn beside it. Marian held the receipt under the basement light for a long moment. She read it twice, her eyes moving over each line, each number, each word. January 9th had been a Monday. Tom had said he was working late that night, that he had a vendor meeting and would grab something to eat on the way home. He had come in around 9:30, said the meeting had run long, gone straight upstairs. Marian had been reading in bed. She had not asked questions. She had not smelled wine on his breath because she had not been close enough to smell anything. She stared at the words "lovely couple." She wondered who had been with him. She wondered if it mattered. Then she folded the receipt back along its original crease and carried it upstairs to the kitchen. She did not confront Tom. She did not call out to him or knock on his office door. Instead, she opened the drawer where they kept old bills and appliance manuals and pulled out a clean manila folder from the stack they bought in bulk at the office supply store. She labeled it with a single word in block letters, using a black Sharpie, "Miscellaneous." She placed the receipt inside, closed the folder, and returned it to the drawer, sliding it beneath a pile of old warranty cards and instruction booklets where it would not be immediately visible. Then she went back to the laundry. That night, Tom came home at 8:15. She heard his car pull into the driveway, the engine cut, the door slam shut. He came in through the front door, hung his coat on the hook by the entrance, loosened his tie, and walked into the kitchen. He asked if there was any leftover soup. Marian had made vegetable soup 2 nights earlier. She heated it on the stove in a small pot, stirring it slowly, watching the steam rise. She ladled it into a bowl and set it in front of him at the kitchen table without a word. He sat down, pulled out his phone, and began scrolling through messages while he ate. His face was lit by the blue glow of the screen, his expression neutral and distant. She washed the pot and the ladle and the spoon she had used to stir, the sound of running water filling the silence. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background. She wiped down the counter, folded the dish towel, and hung it on the oven handle. Tom finished the soup, rinsed his bowl in the sink, and placed it in the dishwasher. He thanked her, though his tone was automatic, polite in the way strangers are polite. Then he went upstairs. Marian heard his footsteps on the stairs, the creak of the landing, the sound of his office door closing. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at the space where he had been sitting, at the chair pushed back from the table, at the faint smudge of condensation his water glass had left on the wood. After a few minutes, she put on her walking shoes, a pair of old running shoes with worn soles that she kept by the back door. She pulled on a fleece jacket, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and told Tom she was going out for some air. She called up the stairs, her voice even and calm. He responded from behind the closed door, something brief and muffled that sounded like acknowledgement. She stepped outside into the cold January night. The air was sharp and clear, the sky dark and cloudless. She could see her breath in small white clouds. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. She walked for 20 minutes through the quiet streets of their neighborhood, past houses with lit windows and cars parked in driveways, past the park with the empty swings swaying gently in the breeze. She had always thought better when her feet were moving, when her body was in motion and her mind could wander freely without the constraints of walls and furniture and familiar objects. She thought about the receipt. She thought about the server's handwriting, the careful loop of the letters, the smiley face. She thought about the word couple, how definitive it was, how specific. Not colleagues. Not business associates. A couple. She thought about the cost of the wine, $98, far more than Tom usually spent. She thought about the date, January 9th, and tried to remember if there had been anything unusual about that day, any sign that something was different. There had not been. It had been a Monday like any other Monday. She had gone to work, come home, made dinner, read a book, and gone to bed. Tom had said he would be late. And he had been late. And now she knew where he had been. By the time she returned to the house, the air had numbed her cheeks and fingers. She unlocked the front door quietly, stepped inside, and hung her jacket on the hook. The house was dark except for the light in Tom's office upstairs, a soft yellow glow visible under the door. She heard the muted sound of his voice on the phone, the low murmur of a conversation she could not make out. The tone was different from the voice he used during the day, softer, more intimate, though the words themselves were indistinct. She stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment, listening, her hand on the banister. Then she went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and went to bed. Over the next 2 weeks, she found 3 more small things. The first was a gas station charge on their joint credit card statement. Marian paid the bills every month, sitting at the kitchen table with the statements spread out in front of her, checking each line, reconciling the amounts. It was a task she had always done, part of the routine they had established early in their marriage. Tom handled the business finances. Marian handled the household accounts. On January 18th, she opened the statement for their joint Visa card and saw a charge for $32.15 at a gas station called Pump and Go, dated January 14th at 4:47 p.m. The station was on the east side of town, nowhere near Tom's usual route to work or to any of his regular clients. She knew his routes because she had driven them herself, had picked him up from his office when his car was being serviced, and had met him at restaurants that were convenient to his appointments. The east side was residential, quiet, not a place where industrial suppliers conducted business. She highlighted the charge with a yellow marker, made a note of the date and time, and added the statement to the miscellaneous folder. The second was a florist's invoice. It arrived in the mail on January 20th, addressed to Tom, in a thin white envelope with the return address of a local flower shop called Petals and Stems. Marian had been sorting the mail when she saw it. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was an itemized invoice for an arrangement delivered on December 8, 2022. The description read, 1 dozen red roses, premium, with vase and card. The total was $89.50. Marian had not received roses in December. She had not received roses in years. Their anniversary was in June. Her birthday was in October. Christmas had come and gone, and there had been no flowers. She read the invoice again, checked the delivery address. It was not their home address. It was an address she did not recognize, on a street she had never heard of. She folded the invoice, placed it in the folder, and continued sorting the mail. The third was a mileage reimbursement claim. Tom's accountant sent him a summary every month of the business expenses he had submitted, a routine part of managing the supply firm's finances. The summary arrived by email, and Tom usually printed it and filed it in his office. On January 23rd, Marian was cleaning the kitchen counter when she saw a printed copy of the summary sitting beside Tom's briefcase. He must have left it there before heading upstairs. She glanced at it, saw the header, and then saw the mileage log attached to the second page. It listed distances traveled for business purposes, with dates and destinations. She scanned the entries, comparing them to the appointments on Tom's shared calendar, a digital calendar they both had access to so they could coordinate their schedules. Several entries did not match. On January 10th, the mileage log claimed 123 miles for a meeting in Janesville. Tom's calendar showed no appointment in Janesville that day. On January 16th, the log claimed 87 miles for a meeting in Waukesha. The calendar showed a meeting in Madison. Marian took a photograph of the mileage log with her phone, a clear, well-lit image that showed the dates and distances. Then she placed the summary back exactly where Tom had left it. She transferred the photograph to her laptop, printed it, and added it to the folder. By then, the folder was no longer thin. It had weight. It had substance. On January 20th, Marian noticed a change in the way Tom handled the mail. Before, he would leave it on the counter in a loose pile, unopened, sometimes for days. Bills, advertisements, catalogs, all stacked together in a messy heap that Marian would eventually sort through. Now, he met the mail carrier at the door if he was home, or he checked the mailbox as soon as he pulled into the driveway. Letters disappeared into his office before his jacket was even hung up. When Marian asked if there was anything important, he said it was just tax documents and vendor invoices, nothing she needed to worry about. His tone was light, almost dismissive, but his hands moved faster than usual as he spoke, shuffling envelopes into a neat stack and tucking them under his arm. One evening, Marian came home from work and saw Tom standing by the mailbox at the end of the driveway. She pulled up behind his car, got out, and walked toward him. He had already collected the mail and was flipping through the envelopes quickly, his eyes scanning the return addresses. When he saw her approaching, he slipped the stack under his arm and smiled. "Just some invoices," he said. She nodded. "Anything I need to see?" she asked. "No," he said. "All business stuff." She did not push. She simply walked past him into the house, set her purse on the counter, and started preparing dinner. But she noted the interaction in her mind, the quickness of his movements, the way he had turned his body slightly to shield the mail from her view. That night, after he went to bed, she went to his office. The door was unlocked. She turned on the small desk lamp and looked through the papers on his desk, careful not to disturb the order. She found nothing unusual. The envelopes he had brought in earlier were nowhere to be seen. She checked the locked drawer of his desk, the one where he kept personal files. It was still locked. She did not have a key. She turned off the lamp and went back to bed. On January 27th, Tom left the house at 6 in the evening. It was a Friday. He said he had a budget review meeting with a supplier and that it might run late. Marian was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for a stir-fry. She asked which supplier. He said a new vendor out of Milwaukee, someone he was considering adding to the roster. She asked if he wanted to have dinner with him. He said no, he would grab something on the way. She said that was fine. He kissed her on the forehead, a brief, perfunctory gesture, and left through the front door. She heard his car start, heard it back out of the driveway, heard the sound fade as he drove down the street. She finished making dinner, a simple stir-fry with chicken and broccoli and rice. She ate alone at the kitchen table, reading an article on her tablet about staffing shortages in healthcare administration. The house was quiet except for the sound of her fork against the plate and the hum of the refrigerator. After dinner, she washed the dishes, wiped down the stove, and put the leftovers in a glass container in the fridge. Then she sat in the living room with a book, a mystery novel she had been reading for the past week. She read until her eyes grew tired, then marked her place and set the book aside. At 10:30, she heard the front door open. Tom came in smelling faintly of wine and cologne, the same woody scent he always wore but stronger, as though it had been recently applied. He was carrying his briefcase and his coat was draped over his arm. Marian was standing at the kitchen sink, washing the last of the wine glasses from earlier in the week. There were 2 of them, stemmed glasses they used on the rare occasions when they opened a bottle of wine with dinner. She had washed one and was rinsing the second under hot water when Tom walked into the kitchen. "Good meeting," she asked, her voice neutral. "Long," he said, "but productive." She held the glass up to the light to check for streaks, a habit she had developed from years of working in a clinical setting where cleanliness mattered. As she lifted it, she saw it, a faint smudge of lipstick along the rim, a pale coral color that caught the light. It was not her shade. Marian wore muted tones, soft pinks and berries. This was brighter, more vibrant. She stared at the smudge for a moment, her hand steady under the running water. Then she rinsed the glass again, slowly, watching the color dissolve and disappear down the drain. She dried the glass with a clean towel and set it back in the cabinet. Tom stood in the doorway, loosening his tie. "Need anything?" he asked. "No," she said. He nodded and went upstairs. She heard his footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate, then the sound of the bathroom door closing, the water running. She stayed in the kitchen, standing by the sink, her hands resting on the edge of the counter. The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second marked by a small mechanical click. After a few minutes, she turned off the light and went to bed. She did not sleep right away. She lay on her side, facing the window, and watched the streetlight outside cast patterns on the ceiling. The branches of the oak tree in the front yard swayed gently in the wind, their shadows moving across the white surface like slow, silent dancers. She thought about the lipstick, about the faint coral smudge that had been there and was now gone. She thought about the wine they had not shared, the dinner she had eaten alone, the cologne that smelled fresher than it should have after a long meeting in a conference room. She thought about the word couple on the receipt, about the roses sent to an address she did not recognize, about the way Tom's hands had moved when he collected the mail. In the morning, she called a number a friend had given her months earlier. The friend was named Janet, a woman Marian had worked with at the hospital years ago, before moving into administration. They had kept in touch, met for lunch occasionally, exchanged Christmas cards. Janet's husband had left her 3 years earlier, had filed for divorce without warning and moved in with someone younger. Janet had survived it, had hired an attorney who had protected her interests, had walked away with her house and her retirement and her dignity intact. One afternoon, over coffee, Janet had written a phone number on the back of a grocery receipt and slid it across the table. "Just in case you ever need a calm person with a notary," Janet had said. "Her name is Claire. She is good." Marian had tucked the receipt into her wallet and forgotten about it, until now. On the morning of January 28th, a Saturday, Marian waited until Tom left for a meeting at his office. He said he had paperwork to catch up on, invoices to review. She said she had errands to run. He left first. She waited 10 minutes, then pulled the receipt from her wallet and dialed the number. A woman answered on the third ring. Her voice was steady and professional, with a hint of warmth that suggested competence without over-familiarity. "This is Claire Benton," the voice said. Marian introduced herself, said a mutual friend had given her the number, said she needed some advice on estate planning and possibly more. Claire listened without interrupting. When Marian finished, Claire suggested they meet. She had an opening on Tuesday morning if that worked. Marian said it did. Claire gave her the address of her office, a converted brick building downtown, and said to park in the lot behind the building. Marian wrote down the address, thanked her, and ended the call. That same day, January 28th, Marian drove to the post office on the east side of town. It was a small branch, less busy than the main office downtown, tucked into a strip mall between a dry cleaner and a sandwich shop. She went inside and approached the counter. A clerk in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his computer. "Can I help you?" he asked. "I would like to rent a post office box," Marian said. He asked for identification. She handed him her driver's license. He typed her information into the system, asked if she wanted the box size or the locker size. Marian asked about the difference. He explained that the box was smaller, suitable for letters and small packages, while the locker could accommodate larger items. Marian said the box would be fine. He asked how long she wanted to rent it. She said 3 months to start. He calculated the cost, $68, and she paid in cash. He handed her 2 small brass keys on a ring and a form to fill out with her mailing address. Marian filled out the form using her maiden name, Carver, and the post office box number the clerk had assigned. She handed the form back, slipped the keys into the inner pocket of her purse, and left. On the way home, she stopped at a coffee shop and sat in the corner with a notebook and a pen. She made a list of all the accounts she could remember: her individual checking account, Tom's individual checking account, their joint checking account, their joint savings account, her retirement accounts from the hospital and her current employer, Tom's business accounts, the brokerage account she had opened years ago, the life insurance policies they each had through their employers. She wrote down the institutions, the approximate balances, and whether the accounts were joint or separate. Most were separate. Her retirement accounts were in her name only, accumulated over years of work, protected by law as her separate property. The house was jointly titled, purchased 6 years into the marriage. The checking account was joint, used for household expenses. The savings account had both names. She folded the list and put it in her purse. When she returned home, Tom's car was in the driveway. She went inside, greeted him briefly, and went upstairs to the bedroom. She opened the closet and found a plain tote bag she used for grocery shopping. She took it to the kitchen, opened the drawer where she kept the miscellaneous folder, and placed the folder inside the tote bag. She added the list she had just made, the 2 brass keys on their ring, and a small digital camera she kept in the junk drawer. Then she carried the tote bag back upstairs and placed it in the back of her closet, behind a box of winter clothes she would not need until next season. That night, Marian made a second folder. She labeled it Accounts, My Name Only, and placed it beside the first one in the kitchen drawer. She left it empty for now. It was a placeholder, a space waiting to be filled. Then she made a third folder. She labeled it Guardrail, a word that suggested boundaries and protection, something to keep a vehicle from veering off course. She placed the 3 folders in a stack, slid them beneath a pile of old warranty cards and instruction booklets, and closed the drawer quietly. By the end of the week, Tom had changed his phone passcode. She noticed it on a Saturday morning, February 4th. It was just after 8, and they were both in the kitchen. Tom was making coffee, standing by the counter with his back to her. His phone was on the counter, face up, the screen dark. Marian was standing by the toaster, waiting for the bread to brown. A text notification appeared on Tom's phone, the screen lighting up with a preview, "See you soon," followed by a heart emoji. The sender's name was just initials, a period L period. Tom picked up the phone quickly and tapped in a passcode. Marian saw the motion in her peripheral vision, saw him angle his body slightly away, saw his fingers move across the screen. 6 digits instead of the old 4-digit code she had seen him use countless times before. He held the phone at an angle, his body turned, his shoulders tense. Then he read the message, typed a response, and slipped the phone into his pocket. Marian pulled the toast from the toaster, buttered it slowly, and took a bite. The butter melted into the warm bread, rich and salty. She did not look at Tom. She did not ask about the message. She simply ate her toast, drank her coffee, and when Tom left the room, she remained standing by the counter, thinking about the 6 digits, about the initials a period L period, about the heart emoji and the words "see you soon." That afternoon, while Tom was out running errands, Marian sat at the kitchen table with her notebook. She opened a blank page and wrote the date at the top, February 4, 2023. Below it, she wrote, "Phone passcode changed. 6 digits. Message from A. L heart emoji." She added the time, 8:15 a.m. She wrote in clear, legible handwriting, the kind of documentation she had learned to keep during her years as a nurse, when every observation mattered, when every detail could become evidence. Then she closed the notebook and placed it in the guardrail folder. February arrived with heavy snow and a cold snap that lasted for days. The streets turned white, then gray with salt and slush. The temperature dropped to single digits, then below 0 at night. The furnace ran constantly, the vents blowing warm air that smelled faintly of dust. Marian kept her routine. She went to work every morning, driving carefully on the icy roads, arriving early to clear emails and prepare for meetings. She came home in the evenings, made dinner, and cleaned the kitchen. She walked in the evenings when the weather allowed, bundling herself in layers, her breath visible in the cold air. Tom worked late more often. He said the supply contracts were being renegotiated, that he needed to be available for calls from vendors and clients. Marian said she understood. She did not ask for details. She kept her voice flat and her questions simple. On February 3rd, Tom moved the family file box. It was a large cardboard file box, the kind with a lift-off lid, reinforced with metal edges. For years, it had sat on the top shelf of the hall closet, easily accessible to both of them. Inside were tax returns going back 10 years, property deeds, insurance policies, birth certificates, social security cards, the title to Tom's car, the title to Marian's car, their marriage certificate, Marian's prior divorce decree, Tom's first divorce decree, and various other documents they might need in an emergency. They had assembled the box together early in their marriage, a practical step suggested by a financial planner they had consulted. It had stayed in the hall closet ever since, untouched except for the occasional addition of a new tax return or updated insurance policy. On the evening of February 3rd, a Friday, Marian opened the hall closet to get a scarf. She reached for the shelf where she kept her winter accessories and noticed immediately that the file box was gone. The shelf was empty except for a stack of folded blankets. She looked around the closet, thinking perhaps Tom had moved it to make room for something else. It was not there. She checked the other closets in the house, the coat closet by the front door, the linen closet in the hallway upstairs, the storage closet in the basement. The box was not in any of them. She went upstairs to Tom's office. The door was open. Tom was sitting at his desk, typing on his laptop, his reading glasses perched on his nose. The file box was on the floor beside his desk, the lid slightly askew. Marian stood in the doorway. "Strange place for taxes," she said, her tone casual. Tom looked up from his computer. His expression was neutral, but his eyes flicked briefly to the box, then back to her. "Just reorganizing," he said. "Cleaner this way." She nodded slowly, as though considering his explanation. "Makes sense," she said. "Let me know if you need help finding anything." He turned back to his screen. "I will," he said. She stood there for another moment, then turned and went back downstairs. She did not mention it again. She did not ask why the box needed to be in his office, or why it needed to be reorganized, or why he had not mentioned the move. Instead, she went to the kitchen, pulled out her notebook, and made another entry, February 3. File box moved to Tom's office. Locked drawer. Then she closed the notebook and placed it back in the folder. The next day, she called her sister Elise. They met for lunch on February 5th, a Sunday, at a small cafe near the university. It was a place they had been to before, quiet and warm, with wooden tables and mismatched chairs and a chalkboard menu on the wall. Marian arrived first, ordered tea, and sat at a table in the back corner. Elise arrived 10 minutes later, shaking snow from her coat, her cheeks pink from the cold. She ordered coffee and a sandwich and sat down across from Marian. They talked about small things first, Elise's work, a difficult student she was counseling, a teacher who was retiring. Marian listened, asked questions, sipped her tea. Then, when the server brought their food, Marian set down her cup and spoke quietly. "I need to tell you something," she said. Elise looked up, her sandwich halfway to her mouth. She set it down. "Okay," she said. Marian told her about the receipt, the lipstick, the locked drawer, the moved file box, the changed passcode, the text message with the heart emoji. She spoke calmly, methodically, listing each item as though she were reading from a checklist. Elise listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When Marian finished, Elise leaned forward and spoke quietly. "Write it down," she said. "Do not confront. Just write it all down." "I have been," Marian said. "I have a folder." "Good," Elise said. "Keep doing that. And talk to someone. A lawyer. Someone who knows this stuff." "I have an appointment on Tuesday," Marian said. Elise nodded, her face softening slightly. "Good," she said again. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No," Marian said. "But thank you." They finished their lunch in relative silence, the kind of silence that comes from shared understanding rather than discomfort. When they left, Elise hugged her tightly in the parking lot, holding on for a few extra seconds. "Call me if you need anything," Elise said. "Anything at all." Marian promised she would. That same week, Tom's sister called. Her name was Linda Larkinchin, 59 years old, married to a man named Robert who worked in insurance. They lived in Columbus, Ohio, in a suburban neighborhood with wide lawns and 2-car garages. Marian and Linda had never been close. They had met perhaps a dozen times over the years, at weddings and funerals and holiday gatherings. Their conversations were polite but shallow, the kind of exchanges that happen between people who are connected only by marriage and obligation. Linda called on February 6th, a Monday evening. Marian was in the living room, reading. Tom was upstairs. The phone rang and Marian answered. "Hi, Marian," Linda said, her voice bright and slightly too cheerful. "Just wanted to check in. See how you're doing." "I am fine," Marian said. "How are you?" "Oh, busy as always. Robert sends his regards." "How is Tom?" "He is fine," Marian said. "Working a lot." They talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular: the weather, Robert's job, Linda's book club. The conversation felt rehearsed, as though Linda were reading from a script. Then Linda said she had to go, and they hung up. Marian made a note of the call in her notebook. February 6. Linda called. Checking in. Unusual. 2 days later, Linda called again. This time, her tone was different. She spoke more slowly, choosing her words carefully, as though stepping around something fragile. "I just wanted to say," Linda began, "that whatever happens, family is family." Marian held the phone away from her ear for a moment, then brought it back. "Of course," Marian said, her voice calm and even. Linda paused. "I mean, we all go through things," she said. "But family sticks together. That is what matters." "I understand," Marian said. Linda paused again, as though waiting for Marian to say more. When Marian did not, Linda said she had to go and hung up. Marian stood in the kitchen, holding the phone, staring at the wall. Then she wrote Linda's exact words on a sticky note. "Whatever happens, family is family." She placed the sticky note in the guardrail folder and added the date and the time beside it. That night, Tom asked about her retirement accounts. The question came casually, almost as an afterthought. They were sitting in the living room, the television on but muted. Marian was reading a magazine about home organization. Tom was scrolling through his laptop, his face illuminated by the screen. "Do you still have the old 403B from the hospital?" he asked, not looking up. "Yes," Marian said. "Why?" "Just thinking about consolidation," he said. "Ever thought about rolling it into the Fidelity account? Might be simpler." "Not really," she said, turning a page in the magazine. "Might save on fees," he said. "Easier to manage." "Maybe," she said, her tone neutral. He did not bring it up again that night, but Marian wrote the question down in her notebook, along with the date and the context, February 8. Tom asked about consolidating retirement accounts. Suggested rolling 403B into Fidelity. She underlined the word consolidation twice, then closed the notebook. On February 8th, the printer jammed. Marian was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters after breakfast, when she heard a grinding sound from the small office nook off the hallway. They kept a multi-function printer there, an older model they used for printing bills and boarding passes and the occasional recipe. She walked over and saw the printer's red error light blinking. She opened the paper tray and saw a sheet caught halfway through the feed, the paper crumpled and stuck between the rollers. She pulled it out carefully, tugging gently to avoid tearing it. When it came free, she smoothed it out and looked at it. It was printed on the letterhead of their estate attorney, a man named Gerald Brennan, whom they had used for years to draft their wills and powers of attorney. Marian recognized the logo immediately, a simple emblem of scales, and the firm name in serif font. The page was printed with tracked changes visible in the margins, the kind of edits lawyers make when revising documents. Someone, presumably Gerald or his assistant, had used the editing tools to delete and revise text. Marian held the page up to the light from the window and read the visible lines. The initials were not hers. T.L. was Thomas Larkin. The reciprocal provisions, the ones that ensured if one spouse died the other would inherit, were marked for deletion. The executor designation, previously shared between them, is now named only Tom. The contingent beneficiaries, the people who would inherit if both Tom and Marion died, were now Tom's children from his first marriage. Marion's name appeared nowhere in the revised sections. She stood very still, holding the page, reading each line twice, 3 times. Then she took out her phone and opened the timestamp camera app that Claire had recommended during their first meeting, an app that embedded the date, time, and GPS coordinates into the metadata of every photograph. She photographed the page from 3 angles, straight on, from the left, from the right. She checked the images to ensure they were clear and legible. Then she saved them to a secure folder on her phone, backed them up to a cloud storage service, and emailed them to herself at the P.O. Box email address she had created the day after renting the box. She placed the page back into the printer tray exactly as it had been, with the same crumple, the same angle. The error light continued to blink. She closed the tray and walked back to the kitchen. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was even. She poured herself a glass of water, drank it slowly, and set the glass in the sink. Then she pulled out her notebook and made an entry. February 8. Printer jammed. Found will be revisions. Reciprocal provisions deleted. The executor changed to Tom only. Contingent to Tom's children. Photographed with a timestamp app. She closed the notebook, placed it in the folder, and went back to her day. That evening, a FedEx envelope arrived addressed to Tom. Marion was in the kitchen when she heard the truck pull up outside. She went to the window and saw the driver walk up the driveway, carrying a slim envelope. He rang the doorbell. Tom was upstairs on a call. Marion answered the door, signed for the package, and thanked the driver. She carried the envelope inside and looked at the return address. It was from a life insurance company called Keystone Life, a company they had never used before. Their life insurance was through their employers, standard policies that provided a death benefit of twice their annual salaries. They had never purchased additional coverage. They had never needed to. Marion held the envelope up to the light, but she could not see through the paper. She set it on the kitchen counter, pulled out her phone, and photographed it with the timestamp app, capturing the return address, the addressee, and the date. Then she left the envelope exactly where it was. When Tom came downstairs 20 minutes later, he picked up the envelope and carried it to his office without a word. The door closed. Marion made dinner, pasta with olive oil and garlic, a simple meal that required little attention. She set the table and called Tom down when it was ready. He came, ate quietly, and asked if there was more bread. She passed him the basket. They did not speak much. The silence between them felt heavy, like something physical taking up space at the table. After dinner, she cleared the plates and he went back upstairs. Marion washed the dishes by hand, slowly, thinking about the envelope, about the insurance company, about the will revisions. When she finished, she dried her hands and sat at the kitchen table with her laptop. She logged into her retirement account portal. The website loaded, showing her account balance, her contribution history, her investment allocations. At the top of the screen was a tab labeled Beneficiaries. She clicked on it. The page loaded, showing her current beneficiary designation, spouse. It was a generic designation she had set up years ago, a standard choice offered by most retirement plans. She stared at the word for a moment, then clicked the button labeled Change Beneficiary. A form appeared asking for the new beneficiary's full name, date of birth, social security number, relationship to the account holder, and contact information. She did not fill it in. She simply looked at the form, noting what information would be required when the time came. Then she closed the tab without saving. Immediately, the system generated an automated confirmation email. You visited the beneficiary designation page. The email was sent to her primary email address. Marion forwarded it to her P.O. Box email address and to the email address Claire had given her during their phone call, with one line in the body of the message: I will move these when it is lawful and clean. Then she closed the laptop and sat in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. 2 days later, on February 10th, Marian ran into a neighbor at the grocery store. Her name was Patricia Winslow, a woman in her 60s who had lived in the neighborhood for 30 years. She worked at a regional bank, had worked there for most of her career, starting as a teller and working her way up to branch manager. She and her husband, Ed, were friendly with everyone on the street, the kind of people who organized block parties and shoveled driveways for elderly neighbors. Marian saw Patricia standing near the dairy aisle, examining a carton of yogurt. Patricia looked up, smiled, and waved. Marian walked over. They talked about the weather for a minute, about the cold snap that had finally broken, about the forecast calling for more snow next week. Patricia asked about Tom, about Marian's work. Marian answered politely, briefly. Then Patricia's expression changed slightly, her smile fading into something more serious. She leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "I should not say this," she said, "but people try to move things before surgeries." Marian went still. Her hand tightened slightly on the handle of her shopping cart. She did not ask Patricia to clarify. She did not ask how Patricia knew about the surgery, though it was not a secret. Marian had mentioned it in passing at a neighborhood gathering a few weeks earlier, a casual comment about needing to schedule time off work. She simply nodded. "Thank you," Marian said, her voice steady. Patricia nodded back, her eyes kind but sad. Then she turned and walked toward the checkout. Marian stood in the aisle for a moment, holding the carton of milk she had picked up, thinking about Patricia's words. People try to move things. Assets. Money. Property. Control. Patricia worked at a bank. Patricia saw these things. Patricia knew. Marian finished her shopping, paid for her groceries, loaded them into the car, and drove directly to the county administration building. She parked in the visitor lot, went inside, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor, where the records office was located. She approached the counter. A clerk in her 40s, with short brown hair and a name tag that read Sandra, looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" Sandra asked. "I need certified copies of some documents," Marian said. "My birth certificate and a prior divorce decree." Sandra handed her a form to fill out. Marian filled it in carefully, providing her full name, her date of birth, the county where she was born, the case number of the divorce, which she had memorized years ago. She handed the form back along with her driver's license. Sandra reviewed the information, typed it into the system, and said the documents would be ready in 48 hours. The fee was $52. Marian paid in cash, received a receipt, and left. On the way home, she stopped at the hardware store, a large warehouse-style store on the edge of town. She walked to the aisle where they kept safes and lockboxes, rows of metal containers in various sizes. She examined them carefully, reading the labels, checking the dimensions. She chose a small fireproof safe, roughly the size of a shoebox, with a key lock and a handle. It was advertised as waterproof and fire-resistant up to 1,700 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. The price was $89.99. She carried it to the checkout, paid in cash, and loaded it into the trunk of her car. She covered it with a fleece blanket she kept in the trunk for emergencies and drove home. Tom's car was not in the driveway. She carried the safe inside, took it upstairs to the bedroom, and placed it in the back corner of her closet, behind a box of winter boots she rarely wore. Then she went back downstairs and started making dinner. That weekend, on February 11th, Marian met with her attorney for the first time. Claire Benton's office was located in a converted brick building downtown, a 3-story structure that had once been a warehouse for grain and lumber. Now it housed small businesses and professional offices, an accountant, a graphic designer, a therapist, and Claire's solo law practice. The waiting room was on the 2nd floor, at the end of a narrow hallway with polished hardwood floors that creaked underfoot. Marian arrived 10 minutes early on a Tuesday morning. The waiting room was small and clean, with 2 chairs upholstered in gray fabric, a low table with neatly stacked magazines, and a faint smell of citrus cleaner. A water cooler hummed softly in the corner. Marian sat down and waited. At exactly 9 o'clock, a woman emerged from an inner office. She was in her early 50s, with short dark hair touched with gray at the temples, wearing a charcoal blazer and dark slacks. She extended her hand. "Claire Benton," she said. Marian stood and shook her hand. "Marian Holt." Claire led her to a conference room with a long glass table and a wall of windows overlooking the snowy street below. The room was bright and austere, with white walls and minimal furniture. On the table was a yellow legal pad, a pen, and a slim red binder labeled Estate Planning Protocols. Claire gestured to a chair. Marian sat down, unbuttoned her coat, and set her purse on the floor beside her. Claire sat across from her and opened the legal pad to a blank page. "Tell me what is happening," Claire said, her voice calm and businesslike. Marian reached into her purse and pulled out the tote bag she had prepared. She set it on the table and removed the guardrail folder. She slid it across the table without a word. Claire opened it and began to read. She read slowly, making occasional notes on the legal pad. She read the receipt with a smiley face. She read the mileage reimbursement that did not match the calendar. She read the sticky note with Linda's words. She examined the photographs of the printer page and the FedEx envelope. She read the forwarded email about the beneficiary page visit. She reviewed the list of accounts Marian had made at the coffee shop. When she finished, she looked up at Marian, her expression neutral but attentive. "What do you want?" Claire asked. "Control," Marian said. "And time." Claire nodded. She turned the legal pad toward Marian and began drawing a simple diagram. On the left side, she wrote jointly titled. On the right, she wrote separate property. She drew a line between them. "Talk me through what you have," Claire said. Marian listed each asset, each account, each piece of property. Claire wrote them down in the appropriate column. On the left, the house, purchased 6 years into the marriage, titled in both names. The joint checking account, used for household expenses. The joint savings account, where they had accumulated roughly $38,000 over the years. On the right, Marian's retirement accounts, a 403b from the hospital where she had worked for 18 years, and a 401k from her current employer, totaling approximately $470,000. Her individual checking account, where her paychecks were deposited. A brokerage account she had opened years ago with money from an inheritance, currently worth about $92,000. A small condo she had owned before the marriage, purchased in her late 30s with money from her prior divorce settlement, now worth approximately $180,000. The condo was rented to a young couple, generating modest income that Marian deposited into her individual checking account. Claire reviewed the list, made notes, and then drew a third column. She labeled it Tools. "Here is what we need to create," she said. "A revocable living trust in your name. A pour-over will that transfers any assets not already in the trust into the trust upon your death. Updated transfer on death designations for your checking and brokerage accounts. Payable on death settings for your savings account. New beneficiary forms for your retirement accounts, removing your husband and naming someone you trust. A healthcare directive naming someone other than your husband as your medical decision maker. And a durable financial power of attorney, limited and springing." "What does springing mean?" Marian asked. "It means it only activates if you become incapacitated," Claire said. "Legally unable to make decisions. If you are under anesthesia, for example, you are considered incapacitated. The power would activate during that time, allowing someone you trust to act on your behalf." Marian sat quietly, absorbing the information. "And this is legal?" she asked. "Completely," Claire said. "You have the right to designate your own beneficiaries and decision-makers at any time, for any reason. The timing is key. If you make these changes while you are competent and of sound mind, they are valid. If you make them while you are incapacitated, using a properly drafted springing power, they are also valid." "And he will not know," Marian said. "Not until the confirmation letters arrive," Claire said. "By then, the changes are recorded. They cannot be undone without your consent." Marian looked at the diagram, at the columns and the lists, at the word tools written in Claire's neat handwriting. Then she looked up. "Let us do it," she said. They spent the next 2 hours going through every detail. Claire asked questions. What is jointly titled? What is separate? What are the account numbers? Who would you trust if you were sedated? Who could sit with you and say nothing? Marian answered each question carefully, providing account numbers from memory, naming Elise as the person she trusted most. Claire took notes, asked follow-up questions, and clarified legal terms. She explained how a revocable living trust worked, how it would hold title to Marian's separate property and allow it to pass outside of probate, avoiding delays and public records. She explained how transfer-on-death designations worked, how they allowed bank and brokerage accounts to pass directly to a named beneficiary without going through a will. She explained how beneficiary designations on retirement accounts worked, how they superseded anything written in a will. She explained how a healthcare directive worked, how it gave legal authority to someone other than a spouse to make medical decisions if the person was unable to communicate. By the end of the meeting, they had built the structure. Claire made a list of documents to draft: the trust, the will, the healthcare directive, the financial power of attorney, and template forms for the beneficiary changes and transfer-on-death designations. She said her paralegal would prepare the drafts and send them to Marian for review by the end of the week. She asked when Marian's surgery was scheduled. Marian said February 23rd, 10 days away. Claire made a note. "We will prepare everything in advance," Claire said. Signed, witnessed, notarized. "Then we will schedule couriers for the morning of your procedure. The moment you are under anesthesia and legally incapacitated, the springing power activates. We file everything while you are in surgery. By the time you wake up, it is done. And he will not know until the letters arrive," Marian said again, as though confirming. "Correct," Claire said. "The system generates confirmation letters automatically. Banks, brokerage firms, retirement plan administrators. They mail them to the address on file. If that is your home address, he will see them when he brings in the mail. But by then, the changes are recorded. The dates are time-stamped. There is nothing he can do to reverse them without your signature." Marian sat quietly for a moment, looking at the diagram on the legal pad, at the lists and the columns and the arrows connecting them. Then she nodded. "How much will this cost?" she asked. Claire named a flat fee for the estate planning documents, $2,500, and an hourly rate for any additional work that might be needed if Tom contested the changes later. Marian agreed. They shook hands. Claire walked her to the door, gave her a business card with her cell phone number written on the back, and said to call if she had any questions. Marian thanked her and left. Over the next 10 days, Marian and Claire worked methodically through every step. The paralegal, a woman named Rachel with short gray hair and rimless glasses, drafted the documents. She emailed them to Marian on February 13th, a Monday evening. Marian sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and read each one carefully, slowly, highlighting sections she did not understand, making notes in the margins. The trust document was 12 pages long, dense with legal language, but the core structure was clear. Marian would be the settlor, the trustee, and the initial beneficiary. Upon her death, the trust assets would pass to Elise as the successor beneficiary. The pour-over will was shorter, 3 pages, stating that any assets not already in the trust would be transferred into the trust upon Marian's death. The healthcare directive named Elise as Marian's agent for medical decisions, with explicit language stating that this designation superseded any rights held by a spouse. The financial power of attorney was limited and springing, granting authority only during periods of incapacity, with a detailed definition of what constituted incapacity: general anesthesia, coma, mental incompetence as certified by 2 physicians. Marian read each document twice, then called Claire with her questions. Claire walked her through each section, explaining the legal terms, answering her concerns. Marian approved the documents. Rachel made the final revisions and scheduled a notary to come to the office on February 15th, 2 days later. On the morning of February 15th, a Wednesday, Marian took a half-day off work. She told her supervisor she had a personal appointment and would be back in the afternoon. She drove to Claire's office and arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Rachel met her in the waiting room and led her to the conference room. The documents were laid out on the table, each one marked with colored tabs indicating where Marian needed to sign or initial. Claire was there along with the notary, a woman in her 60s named Margaret with a professional but warm demeanor. Margaret verified Marian's identity using her driver's license, asked if she was signing the documents voluntarily and of her own free will, asked if she understood what she was signing. Marian said yes to each question. Margaret watched as Marian signed each document, her signature steady and practiced. Then Margaret applied her notary seal, a round embossed stamp that made a satisfying thump against the paper. When all the documents were signed, Claire set up a small video camera on a tripod in the corner of the conference room. She asked Marian to sit at the table, look directly at the lens, and read a short statement that Claire had prepared. The statement was printed on a single sheet of paper. Marian read it silently first, then read it aloud, clearly and without hesitation. My name is Marian Louise Holt. My date of birth is October 14th, 1970. Today is February 15th, 2023. The time is 2:37 p.m. I am sitting in the office of Claire Benton, attorney at law, located in Madison, Wisconsin. I am of sound mind, under no pressure or coercion, and I fully understand the legal instruments I have signed today. I have signed a revocable living trust, a pour-over will, a healthcare directive, and a durable financial power of attorney. I have done so voluntarily, with full knowledge of their contents and consequences. I have been advised by counsel and have had all of my questions answered. This recording is being made to confirm my intent and my mental capacity at the time of signing. Marian read the statement twice, once for practice and once for the recording. Her voice was steady, clear, and calm. She did not stumble over the words. When the recording was finished, Claire saved it to an encrypted drive and gave Marian a copy on a USB stick. Marian placed the USB stick in her purse. The next day, February 16th, Marian and Rachel went through each financial portal one by one. They started with a checking account. Marian logged into the bank's website, navigated to the transfer on death settings, and changed the beneficiary from Tom to Elise. The system required her to upload a scanned copy of her driver's license and to provide Elise's full name, date of birth, and social security number. Marian had called Elise the night before and collected the information. She entered it carefully, double-checking each digit. Then she submitted the form. The system generated a confirmation number and sent an email to her primary email address. Marian forwarded the email to her P.O. box address and to Claire. They did the same for the brokerage account and the savings account. Each change required a secure login, a scanned copy of Marian's identification, and a notarized signature affirming that the change was voluntary. Rachel had prepared the notarized affidavits in advance. Marian signed them, Margaret notarized them, and Rachel scanned them and uploaded them to the portals. Each submission generated a confirmation number, an email, a timestamp. Then they updated the beneficiaries on Marian's retirement accounts. The 403B from the hospital had an online portal, but it required a physical form to be mailed in for beneficiary changes. Rachel had already prepared the form, filled in with Elise's information. Marian signed it, Margaret notarized it, and Rachel placed it in a sealed envelope addressed to the plan administrator. The 401k from Marian's current employer had an electronic submission process. Marian logged in, navigated to the beneficiary page, removed Tom's name, and entered Elise as the primary beneficiary and a local charity, the Madison Food Bank, as the contingent beneficiary. The system asked her to confirm the change twice, warning that it would replace all prior designations. Marian confirmed. The system generated a confirmation number and sent an email. By the end of the day, all the forms were ready. Some could be submitted electronically on the morning of the surgery, using the springing power of attorney. Others required physical delivery. Claire arranged for a courier service, a bonded and insured company that specialized in legal document delivery, to pick up the sealed envelopes on the morning of February 23rd at 9:15 a.m., 45 minutes after Marian's scheduled surgery start time. The courier would have instructions to deliver them in a specific order, first to the brokerage firm, then to the bank, then to the county recorder's office for the transfer on death deed on the condo, and finally to Gerald Brennan's office with a notice of revocation. Each envelope was marked with a timestamp, a tracking number, and a priority designation. On February 17th, a Friday, Marian went to the bank and opened a new account in her name only. She met with a personal banker, a young man in his late 20s named Derek, who wore a pressed shirt and a friendly smile. She told him she wanted to open an individual checking account, separate from any joint accounts she might have. Derek asked for identification and her social security number. Marian provided both. He entered the information into his computer, asked a few questions about her employment and her address, and opened the account. He asked if she wanted to make an initial deposit. Marian said yes. She wrote a check from the joint checking account for $3,000, an amount small enough not to trigger automatic alerts or overdraft warnings, but large enough to cover immediate expenses if needed. Derek processed the check, printed a temporary debit card, and handed her a folder of welcome documents. He asked if she had any questions about the account features. Marian said no. She thanked him, took the folder, and left. That evening, she sat at the kitchen table and set up online access for the new account. She created a new username and password, something completely different from her old credentials, using a random password generator she found online. She enabled two-factor authentication tied to her cell phone. She tested the login, verified that everything worked, and logged out. Then she created a master list of every password she had changed in the last 2 weeks: the P.O. Box email, the new checking account, the retirement portals, the brokerage account. She wrote them by hand on a single sheet of paper, folded it twice, and placed it in a small zippered pouch along with the USB stick containing the video recording. She carried the pouch upstairs to the bedroom, opened the fireproof safe in her closet, and placed the pouch inside, along with the original signed copies of the trust, the will, the power of attorney, the healthcare directive, and the deed to her separate property condo. She locked the safe with the small key that came on a wire ring, tested the lock, and pushed the safe back into the corner behind the box of winter boots. Then she went to the kitchen and found a roll of painter's tape in the junk drawer. She tore off a small strip, wrapped it around a second key to the safe, and labeled it in block letters with a Sharpie, safe. She opened the cabinet above the sink, reached to the back, and found the ceramic mixing bowl she used to make bread. She taped the key to the underside of the bowl, pressing it firmly to ensure it would not fall off. Then she called Elise. "I need you to remember something," Marian said when Elise answered. "Okay," Elise said. "There is a spare key to my safe," Marian said. "It is taped under the ceramic mixing bowl in the kitchen cabinet, the one above the sink." Elise was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I will remember." "Thank you," Marian said. They did not talk about why. Elise did not ask. Marian did not explain. They simply said goodnight and hung up. By February 20th, 3 days before the surgery, everything was ready. Marian had 3 folders now: guardrail, accounts, and a new one labeled confirmation, still empty but waiting. The couriers had their instructions, the envelopes sealed and labeled, ready to be delivered. The notarized documents were filed in the safe. Claire had submitted a request to the county recorder's office for expedited processing of the transfer on death deed, paying an additional fee to ensure it would be recorded the same day it was delivered. The brokerage firm had confirmed receipt of Marian's updated forms, pending final submission on the morning of the surgery. The retirement account portal showed a draft change, awaiting the final electronic signature that Rachel would submit at 9:30 a.m. on February 23rd. Using the limited power of attorney and the timestamp verification system built into the portal, Marian packed a small overnight bag with clean clothes, underwear, a phone charger, and a paperback book she had been meaning to read. She placed it by the front door. She printed the list of post-operative instructions the hospital had given her: no driving for 48 hours, no heavy lifting for 2 weeks, take medications as prescribed, follow up with the cardiologist in 1 week. She folded the list and put it in her purse. She made a list of people to notify after the surgery: her supervisor at work, 2 friends from the hospital, a cousin in Michigan she exchanged Christmas cards with. She wrote the list in her notebook and placed it in the confirmation folder. Tom asked if she needed him to take time off work to drive her to the hospital. Marion said her sister would take her. Tom seemed relieved. He said he had a supplier meeting that morning, an important one, but that he would visit her in recovery. Marion said that was fine. On the evening of February 22nd, the night before the surgery, Marion made a simple dinner. Baked chicken, steamed broccoli, white rice, all bland and easy to digest. She had been fasting since noon, per the hospital's instructions, so she did not eat. She set the table with 2 plates, 2 glasses of water. Tom came home at 6:30, later than usual, smelling faintly of cologne. He ate quickly, answered a few work emails on his phone, then excused himself and went upstairs. Marion cleared the table, washed the dishes, wiped down the counters. She walked through the house once, turning off lights, checking that windows were locked, and adjusting the thermostat. She stood for a moment in the living room, looking at the furniture they had chosen together years ago, the bookshelf with its neat rows of spines, the lamp in the corner that made a small circle of warm light on the hardwood floor. Then she went upstairs, brushed her teeth, changed into pajamas, and got into bed. Tom was already asleep, his back to her, his breathing slow and even. Marion lay awake for a long time, looking at the ceiling, watching the shadows move as the branches of the oak tree outside swayed in the wind. She thought about the manila folders in the kitchen drawer, the documents in the safe, the envelopes waiting to be delivered, the 90 seconds her heart would spend not beating while the anesthesia did its work. She thought about the printer page with the tracked changes, the lipstick on the wine glass, the words "family is family." She thought about the receipt from Monroe Street, about the server who had written "lovely couple" with a smiley face, about how that single slip of paper had started everything. Then she closed her eyes and let the thoughts settle. By midnight, she was asleep. The morning of February 23rd was clear and cold. The sun came up over the rooftops, sharp and white against the blue sky, casting long shadows on the snow-covered ground. Marion woke at 6, earlier than her alarm, her body tense with anticipation. She showered, dressed in loose, comfortable clothes as the hospital had instructed, sweatpants, a button-up shirt, slip-on shoes. She did not eat or drink, per the fasting requirement. She brushed her teeth, pulled her hair back into a low ponytail, and went downstairs. Elise arrived at 7:15, carrying a thermos of coffee for herself and a calm, steady presence that filled the kitchen like a familiar scent. She set the thermos on the counter and gave Marion a long hug. "How are you feeling?" Elise asked. "Ready," Marion said. Tom came downstairs at 7:30, dressed for work, his tie already knotted. He poured himself a cup of coffee, checked his phone, and asked Marion if she was nervous. "No," she said. "You will be fine," he said. "I will see you later." He kissed her on the forehead, a brief, perfunctory gesture, and left through the front door. They heard his car start, heard it back out of the driveway, heard the sound fade as he drove down the street. Marion stood by the window and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. Then she turned to Elise. "Let us go," she said. Elise drove. They did not talk much. The radio played softly, classical music, something with strings and gentle crescendos. The roads were clear, the traffic light. They arrived at the hospital at 8, 15 minutes early. Elise parked in the visitor lot, and they walked through the main entrance together. The lobby was bright and clean, with high ceilings and large windows. A volunteer at the information desk directed them to the cardiology unit on the 3rd floor. They took the elevator, the doors closing with a soft chime. In the cardiology waiting area, a receptionist checked Marion in. She handed Marion a clipboard with forms attached, a blue pen tied to the clipboard with a thin plastic cord. Marion sat down and filled out the forms: medical history, current medications, allergies, emergency contact. She signed her name at the bottom of the consent form, acknowledging the risks, the anesthesia, the possibility of complications. She acknowledged that she understood she would be incapacitated during the procedure, unable to make decisions, and that she had designated someone to act on her behalf if needed. She handed the clipboard back. The receptionist smiled and said a nurse would call her shortly. At 8:45, a nurse in green scrubs with a name tag that read Karen called Marian's name. Marian stood. Elise squeezed her hand and said she would be right here. Marian followed Karen down a hallway, through a set of double doors, into a pre-op room with a hospital bed, a monitor on a wheeled cart, and a tray of medical supplies. Karen asked Marian to sit on the bed. She wrapped a blood pressure cuff around Marian's arm, pressed the button, and watched the numbers appear on the screen. 118/76, Karen said. Very good. She inserted a line into Marian's forearm, taped it in place with surgical tape, and hung a small bag of saline on a silver pole beside the bed. Marian changed into a hospital gown, folding her clothes neatly on a chair and placing her purse on top. Karen checked her wristband, the paper bracelet with her name and date of birth printed in black ink, and scanned it with a handheld device. She made a note in the chart. The doctor will be in shortly, Karen said, and left. A few minutes later, the anesthesiologist arrived. She was a woman in her 50s with short brown hair and kind eyes, wearing scrubs and a white coat with her name embroidered on the chest, Dr. Ellen Marsh. She introduced herself, sat on a stool beside the bed, and explained the procedure. She would administer the anesthesia through the line in Marian's arm. Marian would feel herself becoming drowsy, then she would fall asleep. She would not feel any pain. She would not remember the procedure. When she woke, she would be in recovery. The whole thing would take about 90 minutes. Do you have any questions? Dr. Marsh asked. No, Marian said. Dr. Marsh made a mark on the chart and left. Marian lay back on the bed and looked at the ceiling, at the white tiles and the fluorescent lights behind plastic panels. She listened to the soft beep of the monitor, to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, to the distant murmur of voices. At 9:10, a surgical technician arrived and said it was time. They wheeled Marian's bed out of the pre-op room, down a hallway, through 2 sets of doors, into a bright operating room with monitors and steel trays and the smell of disinfectant. Dr. Marsh was there, along with 2 nurses and the cardiologist, Dr. Patel, a calm, methodical man Marian had met twice before. They positioned Marian on the operating table, adjusted the lights, and attached the monitor leads to her chest. At 9:15, exactly on schedule, 3 miles away, Rachel walked into a courier office downtown. She carried a leather portfolio containing 4 sealed envelopes, each one labeled with a destination, a tracking number, and a priority designation. She handed them to the courier, a man in his 40s wearing a company uniform and carrying a handheld scanner. He logged each envelope, scanned the barcodes, and loaded them into his van. He had instructions to deliver them in a specific order, first to the brokerage firm on State Street, then to the bank on Regent Street, then to the county recorder's office on Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, and finally to the law office of Gerald Brennan on University Avenue. He got into his van, started the engine, and began the route. At 9:27, Dr. Marsh injected the sedative into Marian's line. Marian felt a cool rush in her arm, a wave of heaviness spreading through her chest and shoulders. The lights above her head blurred, became soft and indistinct. She heard voices counting down, steady and calm, like a metronome. 10, 9, 8. Then everything went dark. At 9:42, her heart stopped. The monitor beside the operating table emitted a single long tone, a flat, unbroken sound that filled the room. Karen glanced at the screen, her expression shifting from routine observation to focused attention. Dr. Marsh looked at the readout, checked the numbers, and adjusted a dial on the anesthesia machine. She administered a counteragent, a drug designed to reverse the effect of the sedative if necessary. 30 seconds passed. The tone continued. 60 seconds. Dr. Patel stopped what he was doing and looked at the monitor. Dr. Marsh checked Marian's pulse manually, her fingers on Marian's wrist, her eyes on the clock. 90 seconds, Karen said quietly. Then, at the 90-second mark, the monitor flickered. A single blip appeared on the screen, a small peak against the flat line. Then another. The rhythm returned, steady and strong, the familiar beep 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 of a heartbeat. Dr. Marsh exhaled, made a note on the chart. Asystole, 90 seconds, spontaneous recovery. She adjusted the anesthesia levels, monitored Marian's vitals, and nodded to Dr. Patel. The surgery continued. While Marian was legally incapacitated according to the consent forms she had signed, the springing power of attorney became active. At 9:35, Rachel sat at her desk in Claire's office, logged into Marian's retirement account portal using the credentials Marian had provided, and submitted the electronic beneficiary change forms. The system required her to upload a scanned copy of the springing power of attorney and to certify that the principal, Marian, was currently incapacitated as defined in the document. Rachel uploaded the power of attorney, checked the certification box, and submitted the form. The system accepted the submission, generated a confirmation number, and sent an automated email to the address on file, Marian's P.O. Box. Rachel printed the confirmation page, time-stamped it, and filed it. At 9:50, the courier arrived at the brokerage firm's office on State Street. He walked up to the reception desk, carrying the sealed envelope, and handed it to the receptionist, a young woman with dark hair pulled back in a bun. She signed the delivery log, noting the time, 9:52 a.m. The envelope was opened by a compliance officer named Linda Torres, who reviewed the notarized transfer on death designation, verified the signatures against the copies they had on file, and entered the change into the system. The new beneficiary, Elise Carver, was now designated to receive the account assets upon Marian's death. Linda generated a confirmation letter, printed it, and placed it in an envelope addressed to Marian Holt at her home address. The letter would be mailed that afternoon. At 10:06, the courier arrived at the county recorder's office. He took the elevator to the third floor, walked up to the counter, and delivered the sealed envelope to a clerk named Sandra, the same clerk who had helped Marian 2 weeks earlier. Sandra signed the delivery log, opened the envelope, and reviewed the transfer on death deed. It was a standard form, properly executed, designating Elise Carver as the beneficiary of the condo upon Marian's death. Sandra stamped it with the official seal, a round embossed mark that said recorded followed by the date, assigned it a recording number, and entered it into the public records database. The deed was now a matter of public record, accessible to anyone who searched the property index. Sandra placed the original in a filing cabinet and generated a certified copy for Marian's records. The certified copy would be mailed within 3 business days. At 10:22, the courier delivered the final envelope to the office of Gerald Brennan. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s named Doris, signed for it and placed it in Gerald's inbox. The envelope contained a single-page notice of revocation, informing him that Marian Holt was no longer represented by his firm and that all prior estate planning instruments he had prepared were superseded by new documents prepared by independent counsel. The notice was signed by Marian and notarized. It was formal, polite, and final. In the waiting room at the hospital, Tom sat in a plastic chair near the window, scrolling through his phone. At 9:58, he sent a text message to someone whose name was not visible on the screen. The message was brief. They just took her back. We'll call later. He pressed send, then stood and walked to the vending machine. He bought a bottle of water, returned to his chair, and continued scrolling. He did not know that across town, for envelopes had been delivered, for systems had been updated, for sets of records now showed different names, different beneficiaries, different legal designations than they had shown an hour earlier. He did not know that his wife's separate property had been transferred out of his reach, that her retirement accounts no longer listed him as the person who would inherit if she died, that her health care decisions would now be made by her sister, not by him. He did not know that the changes had been timed precisely to activate during the exact 90 seconds when her heart had stopped, when the law recognized her as incapacitated, when the springing power she had carefully drafted became enforceable. He sat in the waiting room, drinking his water, checking his messages unaware. At 11:15, Karen came into the waiting room and called his name. Tom stood. Karen said the procedure was complete, that everything had gone smoothly, and that Marion was in recovery. There had been a brief moment when her heart had stopped, Karen said, but it had restarted on its own, and there were no complications. Tom could see her in about 20 minutes. Tom nodded. He texted the same unknown contact again. She is out. All good. Then he sat back down and waited. When Marion woke, the first thing she saw was the ceiling. White tiles, fluorescent lights behind plastic panels. Her throat felt dry. Her arm ached where the line had been taped. There was a dull pressure in her chest, not pain exactly, but awareness, as though her body were reminding her that something had happened. A nurse was standing beside the bed, making notes on a tablet. She looked up and smiled. "You are awake," the nurse said. "How do you feel?" "Tired," Marion said. Her voice was rough, her throat scratchy. "That is normal," the nurse said. "Your heart stopped for about 90 seconds. We got you back. Everything is fine now." Marion blinked. 90 seconds, she said. "Yes. The doctor will explain. But you're stable. Your vitals are good." The nurse handed her a small cup of ice chips. Marion took one, let it melt on her tongue, felt the cool relief spread through her mouth. A few minutes later, Tom came into the room. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands in his pockets. He asked if she wanted water. She said yes. He poured a cup from the plastic pitcher on the side table and handed it to her. She drank slowly, the water cold and clean. He sat in the chair by the window, pulled out his phone, and started scrolling again. Marion watched him for a moment, then closed her eyes. She felt the steady beep of the heart monitor, the slight pull of the line still taped to her arm, the weight of the thin blanket over her legs. She thought about the couriers, the envelopes, the clock moving forward while she had been under. She did not ask Tom any questions. She did not need to. The plan had worked exactly as Claire had described. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the mail. Marion stayed in the hospital overnight for observation. Tom visited once more in the evening, around 6:30. He stayed for 15 minutes, asked if she needed anything, said he had to get back for an early call the next morning. Marion said she understood. Elise came at 7, bringing a small bag with clean clothes, a phone charger, and a magazine. She sat with Marion until visiting hours ended at 9. They did not talk about the surgery or the documents or the folders in the kitchen. They talked about small things, the weather, a book Elise was reading, a student she was counseling who had just been accepted to college. When the nurse came in to check vitals, Elise stepped into the hallway. When the nurse left, she came back and sat down. They watched television with the sound low, a cooking show, a nature documentary. Around 8:30, Marion fell asleep. Elise stayed for another 30 minutes, then kissed her sister on the forehead and left. The next morning, February 24th, Marion was discharged. The cardiologist, Dr. Patel, came by at 8 to review the results. The procedure had been successful. The brief episode of asystole had been unusual, but not dangerous, likely a reaction to the anesthesia that had resolved on its own. Her heart was strong. She could go home, rest for a few days, and follow up in 1 week. He handed her a printout of discharge instructions and a prescription for pain medication. Marion thanked him. Elise arrived at 9:30 to drive her home. Marion changed into the clothes Elise had brought, signed the discharge papers, and sat in a wheelchair while a hospital volunteer pushed her to the entrance. It was hospital policy, the volunteer explained, even though Marion felt well enough to walk. Elise pulled the car up to the curb. Marion got in, buckled her seatbelt, and they drove home. Tom's car was not in the driveway. Elise helped Marion inside, made tea, and sat with her in the living room. Marion drank the tea slowly, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. She thanked Elise. Elise squeezed her hand and said she would check in tomorrow. Then she left. Marion sat alone in the quiet house. She thought about the safe in the closet, the folders in the drawer, the envelopes that had been delivered while she slept. She thought about the 90 seconds her heart had stopped, the flat tone on the monitor, the blip that had returned. She thought about time, how it could be measured, how it could be used. Then she stood, walked to the kitchen, and checked the drawer. The folders were still there, exactly as she had left them. She opened the empty one labeled confirmation and placed it on the counter. Then she sat down and waited for the mail. The letters started arriving 12 days later. On March 8th, a thin white envelope came addressed to Marion Holt at the house address. The return address was from the Retirement Account Administrator, a large financial services company based in Boston. Marion recognized the logo. She opened the envelope at the kitchen table, using a butter knife to slice through the seal. Inside was a single page with a header that read Beneficiary Change Confirmation. The letter stated that her request had been processed, that the primary beneficiary was now listed as Elise Carver, and that the change was effective as of February 23 at 9:35 a.m. The letter included a confirmation number and a customer service phone number to call with questions. Marion folded the letter and placed it in the confirmation folder. The next day, another letter arrived, this time from the brokerage firm. Same format, same message. Transfer on death designation confirmed. Beneficiary updated to Elise Carver. Effective February 23 at 9:52 a.m. Marion filed it with the first letter. On March 10th, a larger envelope came from the county recorder's office. It contained a certified copy of the transfer on death deed for her separate property condo, stamped with the official seal and recording number. The deed named Elise as the beneficiary upon Marion's death, superseding any prior designations. The stamp showed a recording date of February 23, 10:08 a.m. Marion placed it in the folder. On March 13th, the bank called. A manager named Susan left a voicemail asking Marion to call back to verify one of the recent account changes. Marion returned the call that afternoon. Susan answered on the second ring, identified herself, and pulled up Marion's account on her computer. "I just need to confirm that you authorized the payable on death designation update on your savings account," Susan said. "Yes," Marion said. "I authorized it." Susan asked her to verify the last 4 digits of her Social Security number, her date of birth, and her current address. Marion provided the information. Susan confirmed that the payable on death designation on the savings account had been updated to name Elise Carver as the beneficiary, effective February 23. All the paperwork was in order. The change was now active. "Do you have any questions?" Susan asked. "No," Marion said. Susan thanked her and ended the call. That evening, a confirmation letter from the bank arrived in the mail. Marion added it to the folder. On March 15th, a letter arrived from the 403B plan administrator at the hospital where Marion had worked for 18 years. It confirmed that the beneficiary designation had been updated. Primary beneficiary, Elise Carver. Contingent beneficiary, Madison Food Bank. Effective February 23rd. On March 17th, the final letter arrived, this one from Marion's current employer's 401k plan. Same message. Beneficiary updated. Elise Carver. February 23rd. By mid-March, the confirmation folder held 7 letters, each one documenting a change that had been made while she was under anesthesia, each one removing Tom from the line of inheritance or control, each one placing her sister or a trust or a designated charity in his place. Marion reviewed the letters one by one, checking the dates, the signatures, the account numbers. Everything matched. The system had processed the changes exactly as Claire had predicted. There had been no delays, no errors, no rejected forms. The timing had been precise. Tom brought in the mail every day and left it on the counter. He never opened the envelopes addressed to Marion. He never asked what they contained. He went to work, came home, ate dinner, and went upstairs. The routine continued as it had for months, steady and predictable, like a script neither of them acknowledged they were following. Marion watched him. She watched the way he moved through the house, the way he avoided eye contact, the way he seemed to be waiting for something, but did not know what. She wondered when he would figure it out. She wondered if he had noticed the letters, if he had seen the return addresses, if he had pieced together what they meant. But he said nothing. And she said nothing. They coexisted in the same space, 2 people occupying the same rooms but living in separate realities. On March 18th, Marian decided it was time. She called Tom that morning, a Saturday, while he was at his office. He answered on the third ring, his voice distracted. "Can we meet for coffee this afternoon?" she asked. He paused. "Why?" he asked. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. Another pause. "Is everything okay?" he asked. "We just need to talk," she said. He agreed. They set the time for 10 a.m. at a cafe near the Capitol, a place called the Daily Grind, a neutral location with wide windows and quiet corners. He said he would be there. Marian hung up and sat at the kitchen table. She opened her laptop and created a new document. She formatted it like a balance sheet, with 2 columns side by side. On the left, she listed everything that was jointly titled: the house, the joint checking account, the joint savings account. On the right, she listed everything that was separate property: her retirement accounts, her brokerage account, her separate property condo, the new individual checking account she had opened in February. She listed the approximate balances, the account numbers, the institutions. At the bottom, she added a third section labeled Disposition. Under it, she wrote one sentence: "I am filing for legal separation with a cooperative schedule and clean boundaries." She read the document twice, made sure everything was accurate, then printed it on plain white paper. She folded it once and placed it in a manila envelope. On Saturday morning, March 18th, Marian dressed in dark pants, a cream-colored blouse, and a navy cardigan. She pulled her hair back into a low bun, applied minimal makeup, and put on small silver earrings. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman who was calm, prepared, and certain. She drove to the cafe and arrived 5 minutes early. She ordered tea, Earl Grey with honey, and sat at a table near the window. The cafe was busy but not loud. Other people sat at nearby tables, reading newspapers, working on laptops, talking quietly. Marian sipped her tea and waited. Tom arrived at exactly 10. He was wearing jeans, a button-down shirt, and a dark jacket. No tie. He ordered coffee, black, and sat across from her. They exchanged brief pleasantries. The weather. The traffic. The cafe. Then Marian reached into her purse and pulled out the envelope. She slid it across the table. Tom looked at it, then at her. "What is this?" he asked. "An inventory," she said. He opened the envelope and unfolded the page. He read it slowly, his eyes moving from line to line, his expression shifting from curiosity to confusion to something harder, colder. When he finished, he looked up. His jaw was tight. His hands rested flat on the table. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice low. "It means I know," Marian said. "I know about the will. I know about the file box. I know about the beneficiary changes you were planning. I know about life insurance. I know about the receipts and the lipstick and the text messages. I know about the L period." Tom did not respond. He stared at the paper, his knuckles white. "I am filing for legal separation," Marian continued, her voice steady and even. "Not contested. Just clean. We will divide what is joint per the state formula. Everything else stays separate." Tom set the paper down slowly. His face had gone pale. "You cannot do this," he said. "I already did," Marian said. Tom leaned back in his chair. He looked out the window, at the people walking past on the sidewalk, at the cars parked along the street. Then he looked back at her. His hands curled into fists, then relaxed. He did not raise his voice. He did not argue. He simply sat there, the document between them, the coffee cooling in his cup. When he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "February 23rd, Marian said. While I was under. The changes are recorded. The accounts are updated. The deeds are filed. You will receive copies in the mail." Tom stood abruptly. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that drew a few glances from nearby tables. He left the document on the table, walked out of the cafe, and got into his car. Marian watched him through the window. She saw him sit in the driver's seat, both hands on the steering wheel, his head bowed. Then he started the engine and drove away. Marian folded the paper, placed it back in the envelope, and finished her tea. She sat for a few more minutes, watching the people outside, the rhythm of the city continuing as it always did. Then she stood, threw away her cup, and walked to her car. The next day, March 19th, Tom's sister Linda called. Marian let it go to voicemail. Linda's message was short and strained, her voice tight with emotion. "I talked to Tom," she said. "I do not understand what is happening. This is not how family treats family. Please call me back." Marian deleted the message without listening to it a second time. Then she blocked Linda's number. On March 22nd, a courier arrived at the house and delivered a large envelope addressed to Tom. Marian was not home. She had taken the afternoon off work to attend a follow-up appointment with Dr. Patel, who had cleared her to return to normal activities. When she returned home that evening, the envelope was on the kitchen counter, unopened. Tom was upstairs. The envelope was thick, legal-sized, with Claire's firm name and address printed in the upper left corner. Inside was the legal petition for separation, filed by Claire on Marian's behalf, along with a cover letter explaining the process, the timeline, and the cooperative framework Marian was proposing. There were no emergency motions, no requests for temporary orders, no allegations of fault or misconduct. Just a clean division of property and a request for a formal separation agreement. Tom did not speak to Marian that night. He left the envelope on the counter and went to bed. In the morning, the envelope was gone, taken to his office. Marian made coffee, toasted bread with butter and jam, and went about her day. She did not chase him down. She did not demand a response. She simply continued as she had before, steady and methodical, one day at a time. Over the next 2 weeks, Tom hired an attorney. His attorney was named Richard Kellerman, a family law practitioner with an office downtown, a man in his 60s with a reputation for being thorough but fair. Richard called Claire on March 27th. They scheduled a meeting for April 5th. On the morning of April 5th, both attorneys sat down in a conference room at Claire's office. Tom was not there. Marian was not there. It was just the lawyers, reviewing the asset inventory Marian had prepared, discussing the legal framework, negotiating the details. Richard questioned the timing of the changes Marian had made, argued that they had been executed while she was incapacitated and therefore might be contestable. Claire pulled out the video recording, the notarized power of attorney, the medical consent forms, and the legal opinion she had prepared explaining the validity of springing powers under Wisconsin law. She played the video on her laptop. Marian's face appeared on the screen, calm and clear, reading the statement she had prepared. Her voice was steady, her words deliberate. "I am of sound mind, under no pressure, fully aware of what I am doing." The timestamp was visible in the corner. February 15th, 2023, 2:37 p.m., 8 days before the surgery. Richard watched the video, made notes on a yellow legal pad, and said he would need to consult with his client. On April 12th, Richard called Claire and said his client was willing to proceed with a cooperative separation. Over the next 3 weeks, they negotiated the details, exchanging drafts of the separation agreement via email, refining the language, and clarifying the terms. The house would be sold, and the proceeds split per the state formula, which in Wisconsin meant each party would receive half of the appreciation accrued during the marriage, plus a return of any separate property contributions either had made to the purchase. The joint checking and savings accounts would be divided equally, the balances split down to the penny. Marian's retirement accounts, which she had earned before and during the marriage, would remain hers as separate property under Wisconsin law. Tom's business assets, which he had owned before the marriage and operated independently, would remain his. The separate property condo would stay in Marian's name, transferred on death to a lease as already recorded. No spousal support would be requested by either party, given that both were employed and self-sufficient. No contest clauses would be enforced, meaning neither party would challenge the validity of the other's estate planning documents. Both parties would waive any claims to the other's estate, current or future. On May 3rd, they signed the agreement in Claire's office. Tom arrived first, accompanied by Richard. He sat at the conference table, his face expressionless, his posture rigid. Marian arrived 5 minutes later with Claire. She sat at the opposite end of the table. They did not speak to each other. Claire and Richard placed the agreement on the table, a document that had grown to 23 pages over the course of the negotiations. They reviewed it line by line, Tom and Richard on one side, Marian and Claire on the other. When they finished, Tom signed each page, initialing each exhibit. His signature was hurried, the letters jagged. Then he stood and left without speaking. Marian signed after him, her hand steady, her signature the same as it had always been, neat and legible. Claire notarized the documents, made copies for everyone, and filed the agreement with the court that afternoon. The judge assigned to their case reviewed the agreement on May 9th. She found it fair, comprehensive, and voluntarily entered by both parties. She signed the order approving the separation. The order became final 30 days later, on June 8, 2023. By June 15th, the house was listed. A realtor named Karen Schuster, a woman in her 50s with decades of experience in the Madison market, came to the house, took photographs, and suggested a listing price of $375,000. Tom and Marian agreed. The house went on the market on June 20th. Within 2 weeks, they had 3 offers. They accepted the highest one, $382,000, from a young couple with 2 children and a golden retriever. The closing was scheduled for July 26th. On the morning of July 26th, Marian and Tom met at the title company office, a small suite in a nondescript office building near the interstate. The closing took 90 minutes. They signed dozens of pages, initialing disclosures, acknowledging receipts, transferring title. When it was finished, the title officer handed each of them a check. Marian's was for $163,412, representing her half of the proceeds after paying off the remaining mortgage, the realtor's commission, and the closing costs. Tom's check was for the same amount. They stood, collected their copies of the documents, and left separately. Tom walked out first. Marian waited a few minutes, then followed. She drove to the bank and deposited her check into the new individual checking account she had opened in February. The balance appeared on the screen, $163,412. She logged out, thanked the teller, and walked back to her car. By August 1st, Tom had moved to a townhouse near the Beltline, a modern 2-bedroom unit with underground parking, granite countertops, and a view of the highway. Marian kept the dining table, the bookshelf, the lamp that made the circle of warm light in the corner. She moved the furniture into the separate property condo, the one she had owned before the marriage, the one that now appeared in the public records as transferred on death to a lease. The condo was smaller than the house, just over 1,000 square feet, with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and an open living area. The tenants who had been renting it had moved out in July, giving Marian the opportunity to move in herself. It was on the 2nd floor of a quiet building near the university, with tall windows that let in plenty of light. She arranged the furniture carefully, placing the bookshelf against one wall, the dining table near the window, the lamp on a side table near the couch. She unpacked boxes of dishes, books, clothes, all the small pieces of a life lived for 22 years with someone else. She kept what mattered, donated what did not. By mid-August, the condo felt like hers. The walls were painted a soft cream color. The floors were hardwood, old but well-maintained. The kitchen was small but functional. She bought new curtains, light gray linen that softened the afternoon sun. She hung a single piece of art, a watercolor landscape she had purchased years ago at a local gallery, above the couch. By September, the leaves began to turn. Marian settled into a new routine. She walked in the mornings now instead of the evenings, taking a different route through a different neighborhood. She made tea at night, Earl Grey with honey, and put the cup on a cork coaster so it would not mark the wood of the side table. She read books from the library, watched the news, called Elise on Sundays. She did not hear from Tom. His number remained in her phone, but no calls came through. His sister Linda stopped trying. The folders remained in the kitchen drawer, labeled and filed, evidence of a season that had passed. On a Saturday morning in late September, Marian drove past the hospital where the surgery had taken place. She did not plan to. She was on her way to the farmer's market downtown, and the route took her down the same street where she had arrived on that cold February morning. She saw the building, the tall windows, the parking structure where Elise had parked. She slowed the car and looked up at the cardiology ward, trying to remember which window had been hers. She could not tell from the street. They all looked the same, rows of glass reflecting the autumn sky. She thought about the 90 seconds. The flat tone on the monitor. The blip that returned. The time it took for her heart to stop and start again. The time it took for the couriers to deliver the envelopes. The time it took for the systems to process the changes. She thought about how precise it had all been, how carefully timed, how quietly executed. She had not shouted. She had not confronted. She had not demanded or pleaded. She had simply prepared, waited, and acted when the law allowed her to act. The revenge, if it could be called that, had not been dramatic. It had been a series of forms and signatures and timestamps, a rearrangement of names and designations in databases and filing cabinets. But it had been completed. She drove on to the farmer's market, parked, and walked among the stalls. She bought apples, a loaf of bread, and a small jar of honey from a local beekeeper. She carried the bag back to her car, drove home, and unpacked the groceries in her kitchen. She made tea, sat at the table, and looked out the window at the trees swaying gently in the breeze. The light was soft, the air cool. The condo was quiet. That evening, Elise came over for dinner. They cooked together, something simple, pasta with roasted vegetables and olive oil. They set the table, poured water into glasses, and sat down to eat. They did not talk about Tom or the separation or the surgery. They talked about Elise's students, a trip she was planning to visit a friend in Colorado, a book club she had joined. After dinner, they washed the dishes together, Elise washing and Marian drying, the rhythm familiar and comforting. When the dishes were done, Elise left around 8. Marian locked the door behind her, turned off the lights in the kitchen, and sat on the couch with a book. The lamp in the corner glowed warm and steady. She read for an hour, then went to bed. The next morning, she woke early. The sun came through the window, bright and clear. She made coffee, toasted bread, and sat at the kitchen table with the newspaper. The condo was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. She thought about the folders in the drawer, the safe in the closet, the documents that had changed everything. She thought about the receipts and the printer page and the 90 seconds her heart had stopped. Then she folded the newspaper, cleared the table, and got ready for the day. She did not regret what she had done. She did not feel guilt or uncertainty. She felt, instead, a kind of calm clarity, the same clarity she had felt that night in January when she had found the receipt and decided to file it away. She had understood, even then, that the truth would reveal itself in time, that the proof would accumulate, and that when the moment came, she would act. She had trusted the process, trusted the law, trusted her own ability to plan and execute without drama or spectacle. And it worked. Weeks turned into months. October arrived, then November. The air grew colder. Marian wrapped herself in sweaters and scarves, drank her tea by the window, watched the snow begin to fall. She thought about the year that had passed, about the marriage that had ended, about the life she was building now, alone but not lonely, independent but not isolated. She saw Claire once in early November for a final review of the trust documents, to update a few minor details, and to ensure everything was still in order. Claire handed her a sealed copy of the updated trust, told her everything was in order, and said to call if she ever needed anything. Marian thanked her, placed the documents in the safe, and went home. By December, the condo felt entirely like her own. She hung lights in the window, small white bulbs that twinkled softly in the evening. She placed a small wreath on the door, simple and green with a red ribbon. She invited Elise over for dinner on Christmas Eve. They cooked together, roasted chicken and mashed potatoes and green beans. They exchanged small gifts. Elise gave her a new journal with a leather cover, the pages thick and cream-colored. Marian gave Elise a scarf she had knitted herself, soft gray wool with a delicate cable pattern. They sat by the lamp, drinking tea, talking about nothing in particular. When Elise left, Marian stood at the door and watched her walk to her car, watching the taillights disappear down the street. Then she closed the door, turned off the lights, and went to bed. The year ended quietly. Marian stayed home on New Year's Eve, made soup from leftover chicken and vegetables, and watched a movie on television. At midnight, she heard fireworks in the distance, faint pops and crackles that echoed through the cold night air. She stood at the window and looked out at the dark neighborhood, the streetlights glowing soft against the snow, the trees bare and still. She thought about the year that had passed, about everything that had changed, about the person she had become. Then she turned off the television, washed her bowl, and went to bed. In the new year, 2024, life continued its rhythm. Marian went to work, came home, walked in the mornings, read in the evenings. She did not date. She did not seek out new companionship. She was content with her routine, with the quiet evenings and the steady passage of days. Sometimes Tom's name appeared in her thoughts, a distant figure, fading like a photograph left in the sun. She did not hate him. She did not wish him harm. She simply did not think about him much at all. One afternoon in late January, nearly a year after the receipt on Monroe Street, Marian received a letter in the mail. It was from Richard Kellerman, Tom's attorney, a brief formal note informing her that the final division of a small joint investment account had been completed and that her portion, $2,347, had been deposited into her individual checking account. The letter was professional, devoid of emotion, simply a notification of a completed transaction. Marian read it once, then filed it in the confirmation folder. She checked her bank balance online. The deposit was there exactly as stated. She closed the laptop and made herself tea. That night, she sat at the kitchen table with the 3 folders: guardrail, accounts, and confirmation. She opened each one, reviewed the contents, remembered the dates and the moments they represented. The receipt with the smiley face. The printer page with the tracked changes. The video recording where she had stated her intent. The letters confirming the beneficiary changes. The separation agreement signed by both parties. The final deposit notification. She looked at each document, each piece of paper that had been part of the puzzle, part of the plan. Then she placed the folders back in the drawer, closed it quietly, and turned off the kitchen light. The next morning, she woke early, as she always did. She made coffee, opened the curtains, and let the light fill the room. She stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the street, at the trees bare of leaves, at the frost on the glass that would melt when the sun rose higher. She thought about the 90 seconds her heart had stopped, about the time that had passed, about the control she had taken back. She thought about the manila folders and the fireproof safe and the certified copies filed away. She thought about the quiet precision of it all, the way justice had arrived not through confrontation, but through preparation, not through anger, but through clarity. Then she turned away from the window and started her day. Years would pass. The folders would remain in the drawer, yellowing slightly with time, the edges softening. The safe would stay in the closet, locked and secure. Elise would visit every other Sunday, as she always had. Marian would continue her walks, her tea in the evenings, her books from the library. She would grow older, her hair grayer, her step perhaps a little slower. But the calm she had found, the clarity she had earned, would remain. If anyone had asked her about that winter, about the surgery and the separation and the quiet way it all unfolded, she would have told them the truth. She would have said that betrayal had taught her the value of preparation, that patience had taught her the power of timing, and that silence, used well, could be louder than any argument. She would have said that the law, when understood and respected, could be a tool for justice, not just a set of rules to follow. She would have said that revenge, if it could be called that, did not need to be cruel or allowed to be effective. It only needed to be lawful, precise, and perfectly timed. But no one asked. And Marian did not offer. She lived her life, quiet and steady, in the condo with the circle of warm light in the corner. She made tea at night, placing the cup carefully on the cork coaster so it would not mark the wood. She read books, walked in the mornings, visited with Elise on Sundays. She slept well. When she woke, she liked the way the light landed on the kitchen floor, soft and even, like a promise kept. Like a life reclaimed. Like justice served in the quietest possible way. And in the drawer, the folders remained, labeled and filed, evidence of a story that had ended exactly as she had planned. Every story here will stir your soul. Welcome to Spice and Sugar, your daily escape into real emotions, bold lives, and unforgettable lessons. Here, it's all about love, loss, laughter, and the quiet strength that carries us through. I share stories that make you feel, that remind you you're not alone, that every bitter moment can lead to something sweet. If you want to laugh, cry, and see life through stories that heal and inspire, subscribe and stay a while.